And how much can evolutionary psychology be backed up by science and data, and how much is it you've got this vibe? And basically, your books are expressing a vibe you have in your head.
Well, these are, they're very well documented psychological studies say there's certain areas I think are not well documented, but certain areas, like, for example, the social identity mechanisms in psychology. I mean, psychological research for the last 30 years has been talking about psychological mechanisms that make people identify more strongly with their in-groups than with out-groups. And there's increasing data, and these are just hard science kind of psychology, showing that people trust people who are more like themselves and who appear more like themselves. They seem to have more rapport with them and so on. So I think that, and now with the research of Robert Putnam at Harvard showing that people, when you get into these multicultural situations, people become more isolated. They don't trust their neighbors.
So people who are a part of a particular ethnicity, be that white, be that Jewish, be that Arab, be that whatever, if they sincerely or they believe that they don't feel necessarily a connection to other people from their ethnicity, are they like in denial or something? Like, I imagine there'd be a lot of inner city Jews, for example, who'd feel some connection to inner city non-Jews more than they'd feel a connection to, like, a Jewish person from a totally different country, different culture. Are they just suppressing what they should be feeling?
Well, I think it certainly is the case with quite a few Jews that they're not as strongly identified as the people who run the organized Jewish community. Whenever you write about Jewish issues, you have to make a distinction between the organized Jewish community, which is the main force, say, for pro-Israel policies and so on, versus the average Jew. They may not be as committed, but the other thing is that when there are crises, like, for example, in the Six-Day War in 1967, quite a few American Jews suddenly realized that they were more Jewish than they thought they were. In other words, things are going along well, and there's no real threats to Israel or other Jewish interests. I don't think there's a strong identity. But when push comes to shove, when things start to get more iffy and dicey, well, then I think there's a stronger sense of identity, and that again, accords with the idea of evolutionary psychology that these psychological mechanisms, are fundamentally about group competition. When when the competition heats up, you have a stronger sense of identity, and that's another reason why I predict that in the future, whites will identify more strongly with their own race. Because they will start to see themselves as a minority, and then they'll have to wonder, how are we going to organize once we're a minority? Are we going to be victimized by crime? Are we going to be victimized by affirmative action? What are we're going to have to organize by race, because that's the way it always breaks down.
Again, this is just a vibe I have, not any data, but it does seem to be that since Barack Obama was elected, there seems to be slightly more permission in the mainstream for whites who want to identify as whites to kind of get away with it in a way that they wouldn't have 10 years ago. Like, for example, Glenn Beck, very popular presenter on Fox News, talking about how Barack Obama, doesn't like white people, or even bringing up that whole distinction between black and white people. It seems like, even though he got flack for saying that, it's sort of like something that someone in the mainstream wouldn't have said 10 years ago.
That's interesting. I think that Glenn Beck is certainly somebody who has to be reckoned with. I noticed the Anti-Defamation League has put out something about him, condemning Glenn Beck, trying to get him off the air. And I think it's possible that there's more of a sense that that's okay now. But again, even with Glenn Beck, he's not explicitly talking about white racial identity. He's saying that Obama has this racist attitude. He himself, at least is what he says, is that he's eschewing any sense of racial or ethnic identity. He's a libertarian and all that. But I think that under the surface, there is a great deal of anxiety in white America. And you see all these Tea Party rallies. You see people very concerned about the direction of the country. And they talk about health care, but underneath it all, there's I think it's more than that the America that they grew up in is pretty much disappearing. and we don't know what the future is going to be like in terms of is it going to be really okay or not. And it's a different feeling than when I was growing up. We had Republicans and Democrats, and I don't think anybody thought that the future would be dramatically different than it was now.
But wouldn't people say it's just whites having to hand over a bit of privilege or that they always had, and that's what the problem is? Basically, it's not necessarily a bad thing that things are evening out a bit.
Yes, that's possible. But the thing is, once whites become a minority, they will essentially be at the mercy of non-white groups, and a lot of these non-white groups have historical grudges against them. Certainly, Black Americans for good reasons. I mean, slavery and all that. And Jewish Americans have a strong sense that white America was very anti-Semitic, viciously anti-Semitic during the 1920s, the immigration laws. They shut off immigration from Europe, largely because of they felt there were too many Jews coming to this country. So there is a strong sense among a lot of these minority groups of hostility towards white America. Well, when whites become a minority, I think they're going to have to worry about their physical safety. I don't think they can assume that there's going to be just a wonderful, harmonious, multicultural future ahead.
Do you ever get does it ever occur to you that there's a real generational difference? I even feel like I'm in my 30s, and I even feel like people in their early 20s care less about race than I do, and people older than me, or ethnicity, sorry, rather than race, and people older than me, they care about it much more. Maybe things have just moved on.
Yes, I think that is right. And if you
maybe 20-year-old white American, like maybe 50-year-old white Americans are feeling, oh my God, the times are moving, and I don't like how fast they're moving. But maybe 15-year-old, 20-year-old white Americans don't really mind. They've just grown up in a different era. They've listened to all sorts of cultural influences. And to them, it's just a bit of a shoulder shrug that, we're becoming all more multicultural.
That's possible, but I do think that these same people who are young now and have these idealistic views that they've gotten in college and in high school, I think they're going to change as they themselves get older and they start confronting the reality of, supporting a family, finding a place to live where they feel safe. And essentially, what white people have been doing in the last 50 years is they've been leaving these urban areas and going to suburbs where there are other white people. Well, they keep moving away, and that's true in California, where white people are moving further and further away to get to areas where there are basically white enclaves. Well, that may happen, and that the future of America are these various ethnic, racial enclaves. Well, I don't think that's a particularly bright future. I don't know why anybody would want that future, but that's a possible thing. I do think that as you get older, there's a tendency to you're concerned about your children, you're concerned about the future more than you are when you're young, and I think these same white people, when they try to get jobs, they're going to see affirmative action stacked against them.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap it up, but thank you for giving us so much of your time. Kevin MacDonald, Professor of Psychology at the California State University. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran with John Safran and Father Bob McGuire on Triple J.